Hey, Candy. What? I didn't tell you to get on here. What'd I do? I didn't do anything. Hey, Teddy. Hey, Vincy. I should have tried that out earlier, I guess. Don't I have you on the books to read, Lennon Cooper? Hey, Delaney. Is it too loud? Yeah, is the music too loud? I turned it on to figure out my microphone over there, but okay. This is what I was working with on my other computer. The microphone's built in, so I'm not sure what happened that it quit working. I'm gonna have to do some figuring out. Uh-oh, now I've lost. Where's Olivia? I'm gonna give it a few more minutes. Usually I would jump on now, but I'll give it a few more minutes because that one, Candy, that one wasn't, but I don't know, $15 through Amazon. Wasn't much. My monitors don't have cameras on them, so not sure what happened with that. All right, where's Olivia? And she said Olga was coming tonight too. I now have people from around the world. Finally reached Russia, y'all. I made it big time. Oh my gosh, it doesn't do much to impress me. Just a little old country girl from Georgia. Oops. Turn the screen around. All right, Delaney, am I reading, just starting at the beginning and reading for an hour? Usually it's like 1 through 3, something like that. Is that what I'm doing? I don't know if Nina asked you or not. Sometimes she forgets. And she's had a rough couple of days. I also want to say that, okay. I also want to say that these are some of the sexiest, hottest looking teasers I've ever seen. Dang. I don't know if it's because they're kind of dark. I don't know. I don't know if these were hot. So, where's short stuff at? Missing Olivia I I didn't really look that close until later on in the day, and there was a bunch of them in a row, and I was like, "Woo!" It could just be that it's been so long since I had any real thing that maybe everything's turning me on. Who knows? Alrighty, it's 8:09. Let's go ahead and get started. Try the other video. Really? See, I don't know if I would. I don't know. I make banners all the time for Nina, so I might be all right. Okay. Nina's on the other video, so. All right. So let's see. So this is part of that hot, sexy cover. There we go. It's talking about. This one's called Crown of Thornes. I guarantee you it has nothing to do with the original. Okay. No, not biblical. Prologue. Life itself is the most wonderful fairy tale. Hans Christian Andersen. Katie. Winters in Thornes were generally mild. One of the perks of sitting in the dead. Okay. One of the perks of sitting in the dead middle of the Mediterranean. Sitting in the dead middle of this Mediterranean Sea. The water was always the clearest blue, the sand white as snow, and the weather nearly perfect all year long. Except for today. Today, the wind tore through our crops without mercy as raindrops fell like bullets against the windows of our island estate. Everything my father had worked so hard for was being ripped up by the roots and thrown across the sky as the storm raged on. The farm was our legacy, our lifeline. It was all we had. Apparently, God and nature had decided we'd had enough. I held back the curtain of my second floor bedroom window, trying to see out onto the water beyond the cliffs. There was nothing but black. Pure darkness was interrupted only by an occasional flash of light. That's when I saw it. Everything happened so fast. A bolt of lightning, a falling tree, a crash louder than the roaring thunder. I ran downstairs and told my parents, not thinking for a moment that my father would run out the door into the unknown. But he did, because ultimately, that's who Matteo Bellazzini was. He ran into the storm to save a king from a tree-pinned car, and it cost him his life. Sutton. What began as a simple winter rain quickly became the storm we would never recover from. The wind didn't howl, it screamed. The rain went from a light smattering against the castle windows to a torrential force in a matter of minutes. My mother paced the floor, holding tight to the rosary bead passed down to her from my grandmother. She paced, she prayed, she worried, because my father, the king, was out there. He'd gone out to help distribute sandbags for a storm that wasn't due to hit until tomorrow. That's who Felipe Thorne was. He wasn't the king who was comfortable merely being a figurehead. Where the people were, that's where he wanted to be. When help was needed, he was there, in person, ready to give. I'd offered to go with him because like father, like son, but he said I needed to prepare things at home. Now I had to wonder if somehow he had known he might not make it back. The moment the weather took a turn for the worse, Dad called me. He told me the roads had begun to flood. Visibility was low, and the wind made it nearly impossible to maintain control of his vehicle. He said the best way home was to cut through the Bellazzini estate, a 9-acre farm located a few miles from our castle. That was 2 hours ago. I put on a strong face for Mom, but my mind raced with thoughts I would never even wish upon my worst enemy. I'd barely turned 25. Is this music too loud? I was trying it out for that, and I kind of like it for background music. It's a movie. Okay. I put on a strong face for my mom, but my mom raced with. Okay. You're the one that counts. But my mind raced with thoughts I would never even wish upon my worst enemy. I'd barely turned 25. There was an instability in our country due to a nasty rumor that our family had stolen the crown, a rumor my father had spent the last 5 years putting to rest. It didn't matter. There would always be those who believed what they wanted. Parliament had recently gone on break. I was nowhere near ready to deal with a worst case scenario. Then the phone call came. There had been an accident. Thankfully, Dad survived, but the consequences of that night ended up changing all of our lives forever. I like it to go with the story, but this is Pandora's the piano guys. It's their station. 4 months later, Katie, chapter 1. I'd always been taught that purgatory was that place between heaven and hell, the pit stop between a good life and a great life, the place where souls went to suffer, where they walked through the flames and came out pure as gold. My purgatory was a palace, except I wasn't dead, and hell had nothing on Thornbridge Castle. I'd always believed I was strong enough to handle anything life threw at me. That's how my dad raised me. I always vowed that no matter what happened, I would arrive, and I lived as though that vow was the law. I'm sorry your grandparents died before you could know them, Katie. I'm sorry you can't go to college, Katie. Dad needs your help on the farm. I'm sorry, Katie, your dad is sick. He might not make it. He didn't make it. Dad died saving the king's life that night, the night of the storm, and I hated him for it. The king, not my father. Dad had a weak heart, not strong enough to handle the stress of removing tree limbs to save a king from a burning car, then carrying him all the way back to our home. He had a heart attack and wasn't strong enough to recover while King Felipe walked away with a broken arm and 17 stitches. I was still waiting for someone to tell me how that was fair. After Dad died, we lost our farm, a farm that had been in our family for generations. A man in a suit from the king's cabinet had come to our home and delivered the news to my mother. He'd said the damage from the storm was too great. It had spread too far. We didn't have the resources, financial or otherwise, to bounce back. At some sort of pity prize disguised as gratitude, King Felipe gave my mom and me steady work at the castle along with a place to live. Mama worked as the queen's secretary and had a room inside the palace in the east wing where the royals stayed. The king offered me the same, but I chose one of the guest houses instead. It was a small 2-bedroom villa behind the south garden, completely separate from the main castle, and it was all mine. It made me feel less like them and more like me, even though these days I wasn't sure who me was anymore. The castle staff scurried around the kitchen, getting things ready for an extravagant gala the royals were throwing tonight. Men and women of all ages moved from one side of the room to the next, with platters in one hand and pitchers in the other. They twirled and weaved around each other in a well-choreographed dance. I knew all their faces, but hardly any of their names. I wasn't here to make friends. I was here because here was the only place I had to go, for now. Madeline, the one girl whose name I did actually know prepared a character board arranging nuts and cheeses around traditional meats and olives. She made an art of food placement. Meanwhile, I spread whipped caramel icing on top of vanilla cupcakes and called it gourmet. Thankfully, my platter wasn't being served at tonight's festivities. I didn't actually work in the kitchen. I only baked in my spare time, which was far too often if you asked my helps. I didn't actually work anywhere in the castle unless reading books and dusting shelves in the library all day could be considered work. King Felipe thought it was a good way to keep my mind off things. I thought it was a good place to hide. Hey, Olga! I lost Olivia in the changeover, and did Nina ever show up? No. King Felipe thought it was a good way to keep my mind off things. I thought it was a good place to hide. I didn't complain because I loved the smell of leather and wood and the warm liberation of getting lost in classical literature. Plus, he paid me and gave me a place to live. That made everything okay, right? Wrong. Do you ever wonder what it's like to be one of them? Madeline asked as she plucked a freshly washed grape from a metal strainer. She was talking about the Thornes, the royal family. They were all she ever talked about. They were all anyone ever talked about. I swiped my finger along the edge of my bowl full of icing, sticking it in my mouth, then pulling it out with a loud pop. Not even a little bit. Do you think they're like us? I drizzled salted caramel on top of cupcake number 4. Of course they're like us. They eat. They sleep. I scrunched up my nose. They poop. Madeline chucked a grape at me from the other side of the massive kitchen island. Ew! I caught it, then popped it into my mouth. I mean, what else do you expect from a bunch of buttholes? I added. An older woman laughed as she walked by, nudging my hip with hers. Careful, Katie. Someone might hear you, she teased. I shot her a wink because I didn't care if they did. I'm kidding. I curled my lip and thought about it for a second. Kinda. I mean, I'm sure they poop, but they're just people, normal, human, and flawed. Nothing special. Madeline got that faraway look in her eyes that the way she did every time she was about to trail off into some Cinderella fantasy. Even Prince Sutton? I coated my spatula with more icing. Especially Prince Sutton. Oh, Ori did make it. Why don't you like him? I never said I didn't like him. Someone dropped something metal on the marble tile floor. The clatter and clank made me flinch, like God himself recognized my lie and called me out on it. Sorry, a male voice called out from somewhere I couldn't see. Madeline waved a hand over her head, letting whoever he was know it was fine. You never said you did. I heaved a sigh, then took another swap at the icing. I don't even know him. I glanced at the ceiling. Not a lie. Exactly. Your mother is practically BFFs with the queen, and you've never met the prince. Am I the only one who sees how weird that is? I didn't want to meet Sutton Thorne. I'd managed to avoid him this long. I could make it a little while longer to my 25th birthday. 6 more months, and I'd be an ocean away from him, from this castle, and his whole miserable family. My mother works for the queen. They aren't friends. At least that was the lie I kept telling myself. The truth was that Mama had embraced her new role in the castle as if she'd been born and bred to play it. And you're just thinking about your vagina again. She threw another grape. This one hit me on my chest. Am not. I frosted another cupcake, rolling my eyes as I sprinkled the top. R2, and so what if I like him or don't like him? What difference would it make? It wouldn't bring my father back either way. I scooped another fingerful of icing. She opened her mouth and quickly snapped it shut. Everyone in the kitchen stopped what they were doing. The brat, the brat. The background chatter faded as Madeline stared over my shoulder at the doorway behind me. Would you like me to answer that? The voice was strong and smooth, the kind of voice that made simple words seem polished and refined. My head turned, my eyes following Madeline's. Come on. And my heart slammed in my chest the second I spotted the prince. He smirked when our eyes met. He stood in the doorway, one shoulder casually pressed against the wood frame with his legs crossed at the ankles, hands tucked into the pockets of his black suit pants. I'd seen enough pictures of him to know exactly who he was. They were hung throughout the castle, printed in every magazine, and plastered all over the internet. But there weren't enough pictures in the world to prepare me for this moment. Sutton Thorne wasn't something you saw. He was something you experienced. As I drank him in, every 6 foot something inch of him, I forgot for a second how much I really hated him. His chiseled jaw was covered in a smattering of hair. It was just enough to make it look like he missed his morning shave, but not so much as to appear unkempt. A skillful blend of defiance and concession. His eyes glittered the brightest blend of blue and green, as clear as the Mediterranean Sea, and his golden brown hair fell perfectly into place. His mere presence screamed absolute power and disciplined wealth, and fierce unpredictability. Sutton pulled his hands from his pockets and began walking toward me. My heart thundered as my body shifted into fight or flight mode. I was sure he heard it. Everyone in the kitchen probably heard it. I curtsied, knowing it was the proper thing to do, but hating myself for being compelled to do it for him. He took another step. My body was hyper aware of how close he was. Tell me why. It wasn't a curiosity. It was a command. Royal, regal, and entitled, just like the man giving it. Why what? He narrowed his eyes into a glare. I cleared my throat. Sorry. Tell you why what? Whoops, I cleared my throat. Sorry. Tell you why what, Your Highness, I said. Sutton prowled forward, stopping inches in front of me. His eyes locked me in place. Instinct told me to run, but I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. Why you don't like me? His eyes locked me in place. Instinct told me to run, but I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. Why you don't like me? I wanted to defend myself, to yell at him for listening to a conversation that wasn't even meant for him. I wanted to tell him it wasn't fair that he got to keep his father while I had to lose mine. Instead, I swallowed my pride and told him a half-truth. I don't even know you. His eyes left mine to trail down my body. His jaw clenched as though he was contemplating something. A sudden sense of self-consciousness shot down my spine in ice-cold waves, followed by heated anger for caring what he might think. Maybe not yet, he said, his gaze lifted, resting on my lips for a beat before meeting my eyes again. But you will. Without warning, he reached out, his fingers clasping around my wrist and biting into my skin. So much for personal space. Then he lifted my hand to his mouth, drawing my index finger inside. His tongue swirled around my fingertip, slowly and carefully sampling the icing I'd forgotten was there. Did Nina remind you guys that this was going to be a hot flash kit night? Because it's beginning, y'all. It's beginning. His tongue swirled around my fingertips, slowly and carefully sampling the icing I'd forgotten was there. A deep groan rumbled in his throat as his eyes held me in place, like a flowery vine latching onto an unsuspecting stone. I stood here, letting it happen and practically feeling my brain cells die, one at a time, until one of them, the rebel of the bunch, decided to fight back. I yanked my hand away. Sorry, Your Highness, but that doesn't belong to you. He watched as I made a spectacle of wiping my wet finger down the front of his designer suit, one corner of his mouth curled up into a wicked grin. It's my castle. Everything belongs to me. Chapter 2. Katie. You've heard a pin drop on the custom granite counter. You could have heard a pin drop on the custom granite counter. I didn't dare look around me, but I felt everyone's eyes and heard their silent judgment. I'd been around the castle staff long enough to know that every girl with ovaries wanted a shot at the prince. Yet here he was, molesting my finger in front of all of them. They could have his attention. I wanted nothing to do with it. What the five-finger death punch was that? Asked Madeline after Prince Sutton left the kitchen. She laughed at my words. I didn't swear. Not since I got caught saying damn when I was 7 years old and ended up sucking on a bar of soap with tears in my eyes, and Mama reminded me that ladies don't curse. So I didn't. Not really. Not unless I was angry, and I rarely got angry. I was distant, heartbroken, quiet most of the time, but not angry. That was the prince marking his territory. Who does that? She shrugged and continued arranging rolled roast beef around wedges of brie. The kitchen came back to life as the rest of the workers carried on with their task without saying a word to me. A thorn, that's who. I answered my own question. Nothing was forbidden for them. Not our family, not our farm, and not my body, even though he acted like he had no idea who I was. Of course he didn't know. He was the prince, and we were just another charity case for the crown, something to ease their conscience for the wrong they'd done. I hadn't prayed since the day my father died in his bed, the day God took my prayers and shattered them into a million pieces right along with my heart. But I closed my eyes and I prayed. I prayed that for my sake and Sutton's, that what Madeline said wasn't true. Sutton. The moment I heard my name float from the open doorway of the kitchen, I should have done like I always did and let it roll off my shoulders. People talked about me all the time, especially the staff. Sometimes it was good, sometimes it wasn't. This was no different. Only it was. It was very different. She was different. 10 minutes before I walked into the kitchen, my parents informed me that I had 1 year to find a girl, get engaged, and have a wedding. I didn't even date because my entire life, all I'd ever heard was that when you had money and power, people only wanted you for two things, money and power. They used sex, friendship, and whatever else it took to get it. Don't trust anyone. Now I was supposed to get fucking married. They were even throwing a party tonight to make introductions because Tinder matches were out of the question when you were a royal heir. I never asked for any of this. I didn't ask for my life to be put on public display or for a king instead of a father. I didn't ask for the king and father to be dying, leaving me to take his place long before I was ready. And I sure as fuck didn't ask to spend the rest of my life with some woman I probably wouldn't even like. People don't want a king without a queen, Sutton. They want stability. You have 1 year. How the hell was I supposed to manage that? I'd need a drink, and the wine cellar was on the other side of the kitchen. That's when I saw her and lost all sense of rational thought. I stood at the kitchen door and watched the cords of my fate wrap around a blonde goddess with my kryptonite flowing through her veins. All I knew was she was there and I was here, and there was entirely too much space between us. I didn't even give a shit that she was obviously one of the kitchen staff, and that was one of the 10 commandments of being royal. Thou shalt not fuck the help. I wanted her with a ferocity like I'd never known before. Her platinum blonde hair fell over her shoulders and down her black back like strands of silver woven strictly from the sake of being wrapped around my fist. The jeans she wore hugged her curves in a way that made me want to trace every one of them with my tongue. And when she peeked over her shoulder to look at me, I was drunk, fucking intoxicated on her beauty. Her bright blue eyes pierced through me. The deeper she looked, the more I saw. Hidden behind the blue abyss was a pain threatening to climb its way to the top, a sadness for a life she'd never asked for. We were the same. It was like time, space, and gravity all existed for this moment. All I saw was her. All I heard was her. All I felt was her. It felt life-changing. Then she opened her mouth, and every syllable that spewed from it was laced with animosity for a crime I had yet to commit. My brain took every one of her anger-fueled words as a challenge. She was determined to be strong, but I would own her. I would bend her until she broke. Sorry, Your Highness, but that doesn't belong to you. She might as well spit in my face. Fury ripped through my veins hot and swift. She was going to pay for that little remark, and I was going to love making her scream. The ambassador's room practically sparkled with its pristine white walls, marble floors, and crystal chandeliers the size of statues. Opulence. It was my mother's favorite word. I always told her that if she'd look high enough in her family tree, she'd find King Midas perched on one of the golden branches. Thornbridge Castle dripped in wealth, from the guard's shack at the entrance to the guest villas on the back acres. The silky sounds of a cello drifted through the sea of guests waiting for their moment to rub elbows with the king. Hey, this music kind of goes with this now. I tuned out the chatter and let the strings sing to me. Their voice deep, sensual, and dark, just like my mood. I leaned against the back wall with a glass of scotch in my hand as I watched the people float around the room, forcing laughter and faking smiles. An older man in a tuxedo walked past. A woman with diamonds dripping from her ears latched onto his arm. I raised my glass and smiled, amused at the fact that less than a week ago, I'd seen him with a beautiful brunette. And it wasn't the one wearing his ring. Marriage. So this is what I had to look forward to. When we were only 2 weeks into spring and I was already waiting for winter. We didn't entertain nearly as much in the winter. I had nothing against the parties or the people. Lately, it seemed that with every party came more questions. With more questions came the stark realization that one day soon, this would all be mine. The night a storm caused a tree to fall on top of my father's car, we found out he had cancer. Post-accident, routine examinations, and blood tests turned into visits with oncologists. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Apparently, we'd completely skipped over stages 1 through 3, and there was no stage 5. Dad went from living a normal, healthy life to the world of the terminally ill, straight from the frying pan into the fire. We were expected to put on the appearance that everything was fine, hope for the best, prepare for the worst. That's what they kept telling us. It worked for a minute, but people were starting to catch on. Their king was making fewer public appearances, especially during the months of chemo. His normally fit figure had lost most of its muscle mass. It was getting harder and harder to keep making excuses. Normal sons got to say goodbye to their dying fathers with heartfelt conversations and tear-filled memories. Nothing about our relationship was ever normal. I got to watch my dad die from the other side of a conference table in an assembly room full of people. Our private conversations involved going over protocol and to-do lists rather than hugs and endearments. You were born to be powerful, not to be pampered. If the wages of sin were death, then the cost of privilege was solitude. I was about to be the king of a nation, and I'd never felt more alone. Sutton, my father waved his hand at me from across the room. I made my way across the oak parquet floor, past servers handing out hors d'oeuvres on silver platters, making eye contact with everyone else along the way. Always making eye contact, but never for too long. Don't appear to favor one person over another. It was one of the many rules that had been ingrained in my mind since birth. I sure blew that one to shit in the kitchen a couple of hours ago. Then again, I never was good with rules. Dad stood tall and proud near one of 4 arched openings in the room. Even in his illness, my father looked every bit the king that he was, his stature intimidating and his smile welcoming. I knew the woman standing beside him and exactly what he'd called me over. I gave a polite bow of my head when I reached him. Dad, have you met Juliana Bellarosa? Thank you for not making these names really difficult. I appreciate that. The petite brunette smiled, and her perfect teeth flashed brightly against blood-red lips. I reached for her hand, which she gladly offered, then kissed the back of it. Not formally, no, I answered. The rest of the world knew Juliana as the daughter of Prime Minister Bellarosa of St. Carina, a neighboring country off the coast of Italy. Everyone knew her family the same way everyone knew mine. I knew her thanks to a nude selfie she sent to Ashton Massini that ended up going viral. Their relationship didn't last 3 months, but the screenshots lasted forever. He sent that shit to everyone in his contact list. I didn't blame him. She had great tits. Now everyone knew it. Nice to meet you, Juliana. I dropped her hand but held her eyes. My father took a sip of his scotch, then nodded toward a group of men in a far-off corner. Excuse me a moment. There's someone I need to speak with. He set his glass on a passing server's tray and walked away. He's not great at subtlety, I said, hoping my grin helped her relax a little. She returned my smile. It's okay. I think we both knew it was coming. Juliana got that look in her eye, the one that only saw used condoms and dollar signs. Too bad, Princess. I don't fuck strangers. The last thing I needed was someone crying wolf and claiming to have the prince's baby, or worse, saying I'd taken them against their will. I was all for the occasional blowjob here and handjob there, and maybe, if the woman was lucky, I would return the favor with a good finger fuck. I may have been a prince, but I sure as hell wasn't charming. Lest that stranger had sapphire eyes and a mouth that made me crave the taste of her so bad my nuts ached. I sucked her goddamn finger in a crowded kitchen for fuck's sake. I never let my guard down, but for this woman, I would drop the shit like a bad habit. Then my father would kill me after he disowned me and burned my crown. I needed a distraction, and Juliana was it. I need a drink. I need another drink. You coming? I asked. She moved closer to me, stopping with her lips on the edge of my ear. I think it's obvious that our parents hope will happen. What our parents hope will happen here. So why don't we go to your room and give everyone what they want? I kept my focus straight ahead, politely smiling at the many faces across the room. My dick reacted at her suggestion, but I made sure the rest of my body didn't. Isn't what everyone wants? I tilted my head to face her. And you have no fucking idea what I want. Her eyes fell to my mouth. You tell me. She was dripping. I smelled it. Beautiful, rich, wet. She wanted me, and all I could seem to think about was cupcakes and long blonde hair. Whoops. Nope. Don't do that. There it is. Okay, I was just trying to check the time. There's Olivia. She made it back. I was beginning to worry about you, sister. Chapter 3, Katie. Music echoed through the great hall, soulful, powerful, intimate, like a calm voice luring me to follow it. Except I knew where it led, and I wasn't going anywhere near that gala. Mama would be there at the queen's side, laughing and smiling and fitting in. He would be there, deceiving innocent people with his unmistakable perfection, pretending he was every bit as noble as they all believed. I knew better. Even if I gave into temptation and followed the seduction of the cello into the ambassador's room, I wasn't a guest, so I didn't have an invitation. I wasn't technically staff, so I wouldn't be working either. In my world, it was another typical Friday evening with my blanket, a glass of wine, and the beautiful words of Thomas Hardy. The library was solemn at night, which didn't mean much because it wasn't exactly a hot spot during the day. The rich, dark wood shelves, burgundy walls, and a spiral staircase with an intricate iron banister made it seem like church, almost church-like, holy. No one ever really came to the library. For the most part, it sat here in the middle of the west wing like this great, majestic secret, quiet and solitary, almost as though at one time it had been destined for greatness, then left abandoned. If rooms had souls, mine and the library's would be the same. I scanned the shelves like I didn't know what exactly where Tessa de D'Urberville's was. I love that book. Is it true? A gruff masculine voice made me jump. Keaton found me. Not that it was hard. If I wasn't in the kitchen or my villa, I was here. The rest of the castle didn't concern me. I spun around, coming face to face with the polar opposite of Sutton. Keaton was rugged where Sutton was smooth. Sutton was the ocean and Keaton was the forest. The only thing they had in common was their eyes, piercing seas of blue-green that saw into the depths of my soul. I met Keaton my first day in the library. He'd shown up with a cupcake, making jokes about there being a file hidden inside. I was immediately sucked in by his mischievous smile and killer man bun and beard combination that said, "Look at my pretty face, but don't you dare effing touch me." He spent the next 3 weeks shamelessly flaunting his muscles and flirting his way right into my panties. Keaton didn't need to bring me a file and a cupcake. He was my escape. His shift must have ended because he changed from his uniform into jeans and a white polo that looked like it would split at the seams if he flexed his biceps. A rogue curl from his dark shoulder-length hair fell in front of his eyes. Anger rolled off him in waves. Forget the book. I grabbed his hand and walked us to a long leather sofa in the middle of the room. Is what true? I sat down, then parted my legs, allowing him to move between them. They're saying he wants you. They're saying he touched you. That he fucking tasted you, Katie, like a goddamn sample flavor at Ben and Jerry's. It was only a matter of time before Keaton found out about what happened in the kitchen. People loved gossip, and people loved the royals. More than anything, they loved gossiping about the royals. I scooted to the edge of the sofa and reached for his belt. He doesn't want me. I looked up at him as I unfastened the buckle, then the top button of his jeans. And he didn't taste me. He tasted caramel. Whew. Where did Keaton come from? It just happened to be on my finger, inside his mouth, bathed with his warm tongue. The music from the gala grew louder, drowning out the sound of me pulling on Keaton's zipper. He closed his eyes, his breath growing more rapid. Tell me you don't want him. His thick cock strained against the fabric of his tight boxer briefs. I pulled the elastic band down and set it free, licking my lips at the sight of it. Keaton wasn't my boyfriend. I didn't date, and neither did he. We didn't text each other with heart emojis or talk about our plans for the future. He served in the Royal Guard, and I was a good distraction from all the crap he dealt with. I don't want him, I said as I curled my fist around his length and began to pump. Jesus, Katie, he said through gritted teeth. The only light in the room came from a solitary lamp by the sofa and the glow of the moon through the stained glass windows. It was almost romantic, only it wasn't, because this wasn't about romance. This was about two people who enjoyed getting lost in each other after a long day, and I really needed to get lost right now. I brought my mouth to him, licking the dewy droplets from the tip of his cock. Keaton threw his head back and groaned. I fisted him harder, faster. My tongue traced the rim of his thick head while the tips of my fingers slid behind him, between his cheeks and into the crack to tease his tight hole. Fuck, I'm coming. Open your mouth. I opened my mouth wider, welcoming him inside. His hands grabbed a fistful of my hair while his hips thrust forward. He came with a loud growl. Hot liquid coated my tongue, and I savored the feeling. He needed this. I needed this. I don't know that I want him if he's going to come that fast. Keaton slowly pulled away, then dropped to his knees in front of me, cupping my face in his hands. Let me stay with you tonight. His voice was soft, gentle, pleading. You know that's not what we do. Why? His tone grew louder with each word that followed. Why can't it be what we do? I swallowed hard. Because I don't want it to be stuck here. I didn't want to be trapped in a world where I didn't belong. My heart couldn't handle another pregnancy scare. Things weren't always like this between me and Keaton. We used to have sex, lots of it. We both agreed it was only casual, that it would always be casual until I missed my period, due to stress and exhaustion, I later found out. And everything changed. That was over a month ago, and we hadn't had sex since. We still stole moments now and then. We still helped each other escape. We were simply more careful now. I was happy with the way things were. Why couldn't he be happy too? I want more. He continued as though he was answering my unspoken questions. I want more than blowjobs in the library or handjobs in the bathroom. I want you, Katie. He leaned his forehead against mine. His breath danced across my face. I want us. There was no us. We never agreed there would ever be an us. We'd always been on the same page. This was not Keaton talking. It was his jealousy. Is this because of today? Because of what people are saying? Is it some kind of pissing contest? Because I swear, he closed his eyes and cut me off. This has nothing to do with Sutton Thorne. I placed my hands on top of his, prompting his eyes open again. Good, I said, even though I didn't believe him. Then I kissed the tip of his nose, kissed one corner of his mouth, then the other corner, because he doesn't matter. This, I kissed his lip, is all that matters. This is all that matters. He smiled against my mouth. I taste me on you. I kissed him again. Keaton licked the seam of my lips. And I fucking love it. I moved my hands into his thick brown curls as he parted my lips with his tongue. For a split second, something caught the corner of my eye. I glanced over Keaton's shoulder right as he slid his tongue over mine. That's when I noticed the door wide open. I could have sworn it was closed 5 minutes ago. Sutton. Her name is Katie. At least that's what he called her, right after she swallowed his dick. I never went to the library. Nobody ever went to the fucking library, which was exactly why I went to the library. I needed to put some distance between me and Juliana, between me and my dad, between me and the rest of the world right now. No one would look for me in the library. I never imagined that she would be there, and I damn sure wasn't expecting to see her pouty pink lips wrapped around some other guy's cock. It was wrong to stand here and watch. but I was infatuated with her hands and her mouth, and the way her eyes grew dark the minute she tasted him. The darkness that lurked in the depths of my soul bared its teeth. That should be me. Jealousy, rage, and curiosity all blended together in a raging, boiling, and dangerous cocktail. It should have been me fucking her mouth, my fist wrapped in her hair, my cum on her tongue. She steered my demons, and I hated it. I hated that she took my power to shackle the green-eyed monster called jealousy and held it in her tiny little hands. I leaned against the wall right outside the library and waited. Maybe it would be on her, or perhaps him, but one of them had to come out sooner or later. God help us both if it was her. It was him. He walked out, still tucking his white polo shirt into his jeans. Motherfucker. Of all the dicks in Torrens, Katie had to suck the one that belonged to Keaton Valletta, Royal Guard and resident badass. I didn't mean your everyday run-of-the-mill badass either. Keaton was a house guard. The head house guard. That made him king badass, for the lack of a better word. Fan-fucking-tastic. Fuck him and his occupation. The only person I bowed to was my father. Keaton may have been ex-military, all the guards were, but so was I. Consider it part of my future King Deluxe training package. 2 years in Torrens military. I stood up straight and pretended I hadn't been hanging around like a groupie at a Harry Styles concert. Keaton bowed his head as he approached me. "Your Royal Highness," he said through a forced smile. "Keaton," I replied, throwing an arm over his shoulder. He tossed me a curious glance. Royals weren't affectionate, not to each other and definitely not to other people. We shook hands, one shake, two at the most. We didn't drape our arms over anyone's shoulders, and we sure as fuck didn't suck cupcake icing off their fingers. Like I said, I never was one to follow the rules. "How are..." I paused, staring at the fork in the road and deciding which path to take. "Things." I took the easy one. He tilted his head as though he were staring at the same fork in that same road. "Things are exactly where they're supposed to be." He took the one covered in gasoline. I started walking again, leading him down the hall with my arm around his shoulder. The intimate melody of the cello's song was joined by the piano. Hear it? The passion between them grew louder, spilling into the great hall as we got closer to the ambassador's room. I stopped walking when we reached the first open archway and skimmed the crowd of guests. "These parties, it's always the same faces, the same people, same boring conversations." I exaggerated a sigh. "I think next time I'll bring someone new. What do you think?" "Depends on the someone," his bright eyes bore into mine, challenging me to cross the line he drew. I knew he was trying to warn me, but all he did was fuel my appetite. I dropped my arm from his shoulder and widened my stance. "I think you know who." A wide, almost menacing grin spread across his face. The bitter energy radiating off him was potent enough to bottle and sell to soldiers going to war. "Katie doesn't do parties. She's more of a one-on-one kind of girl." Power wasn't a privilege. It was a state of mind, and mine was resolute. "So, no parties then?" I smiled back, catching his gaze and making sure not to look away. I clasped a hand on his shoulder. "I'm sure I'll come up with something." "Right." He straightened his spine, bringing his frame an inch taller than mine, still not intimidated. He opened his mouth, then snapped it shut again. For a minute, I thought he might actually tell me to fuck off. I wouldn't blame him if he did. I wanted something that belonged to him, and we both knew I would eventually have it. "I should get going," he said after seconds of silence. I laughed and nodded toward the gala. "Come inside, have a drink." I narrowed my eyes and studied his face. "Unless you have other plans." I knew he didn't have plans. I heard her tell him no. I don't drink, Keaton replied. Of course you don't. He bowed his head one last time. Good night, sir. Then he turned away from the gala, away from me, away from the reality that a war had just been waged, and he had no hope of winning. He walked right back toward the library, right back to her. Boom! Boy, that ended really good. Whew. What y'all thinking, girls? Let's see. Olivia, you dirty, nasty girl, you. I love it. I'd share them. Hear the cello? Love this emotion. Oh, thank you, Miss Olga. Perfect timing. I thought so too. Thank you, Miss Delaney. I appreciate you letting me read this book. It is totally awesome, and I can't wait to finish it. Yay! Oh, I know it, girl. You just bring it on. Bring on that dirt. Isn't that right? I mean, that's good background music. I'll have to keep trying that. Okay, so tomorrow night. Magnolia by Melissa Adams. Right, Ori? Thank you, Miss Delaney. I've been working on that since I was about 3 years old. I saw, crap, now one name, forget her name. Kit, what's her name? She's the original singer who sung Santa Baby. And all of a sudden, I just, her, anyways, she purred like this all the time. And I heard it one year when I was about 3 or 4 years old. And I was like, I'm doing that. And by golly, I learned to do it. And I've been doing it ever since. All righty, ladies. So, Miss Delaney, can you tell us how much this one is? It's okay. Is it on KU? I know it's Amazon, but I don't have details because you sent me a copy of the book. So, I don't have details. What's wrong? I don't know how to end up there. Ori, hush, you got work to do. You ain't got time to read. $1.99 and also on KU. So, girls, come buy the book. Give this lady some love. You know you want to see if she ends up with just the prince or does she end up with both of them. What you think, girls? It's going to get hot. I can feel it already. All right, ladies. We will holler at y'all tomorrow night. Be back for Magnolia. That sounds like a book my accent's going to like. All right. Have a good evening and happy reading.